On this episode of Comics to Movies, we will be looking back on International Crime from 1938, a semi-sequel to The Shadow Returns, which we covered previously on this show. The plot follows Lamont Cranston, who's a criminologist for a radio station. During a nightly broadcast, Phoebe Lane, an intern for the radio station, comes in with a breaking report about a robbery that is set to go down at a theater downtown. So Cranston heads down to the theater with Lane and runs into the police chief, who hates Cranston's show as it portrays the police in a negative light. But he wanted to make sure in person if the tip was true or false. Soon, the cops are called to another part of town, as there was an explosion at a house. When they get across town, they end up finding a man named Gerald Morton dead, and his safe is robbed. Cranston then gathers that the crime was a murder and not a robbery, but is arrested so that the cops can keep him quiet. But luckily, Phoebe and his driver Mo bail him out in time for the next broadcast. However, moments into his broadcast, he is held up by a man named Honest John, who is coaxed into saying that he is innocent on air, after which he ran out. Cranston then realizes that there must be a connection between the man who gave the tip to Phoebe and the murder of Mr. Morton. So they set out to find the man she saw by taking a tour of several nightclubs. Eventually they find the man, and Lamont tries to get information from him by using a foreign accent. He quickly learns the man's name is Floto. Eventually, after talking, they arrange for a lunch the next day in hopes of finding more information. When Floto and his lackey went off to the lunch, they ended up breaking into his house to look for clues. That's when a man calls and thinks that Cranston is Flotop. However, Floto and Starkov come home. That is when Shadow's manslave Mo comes in and rescues them by flashing a fake gun that was truly a cigarette holder. Cranston then writes a newspaper column he uses to bait Floto. However, he is then kidnapped by Honest John, who happens to lead him to Mo's cab. However, Cranston gets the jump on him and manages to trick him with the fake gun from earlier. The police then get a tip from Lane that Cranston is at Morton's house. At the Morton house, Floto is trying to frame Gerald's brother Roger Morton for Gerald's death by taking money and then forcing him to commit suicide. However, before this could happen, Lamont Cranston saves him, and the police come in time to capture Floto and Starkov. And the movie ends with the Shadow complimenting the police force and bidding warning to criminals that crime doesn't pay. I enjoyed this movie, similarly to the last Shadow film I covered. However, despite Rod Rocks reprising his role as the Shadow, for some reason this movie is clearly not a continuation of the first film. The movie was also shot quite different, where the first film was a straight drama and used some advanced camera work for the time. This film was more of a comedic drama. The camera work and editing did not feel nearly as advanced or polished as the first movie. However, the fast pace and timing of the editing really helped the comedic scenes, which were often the highlights of the film. Although this movie had some funny moments, some of the jokes didn't age super well.
I want thrills, adventure, romance.
But the household hint page is the place to find it.
Although considering the year this film was made, it seems fairly tame. The plot is fairly simplistic, but the movie still seems to like to spell it out to the audience every few minutes, often on a radio show or through a throwaway comic relief scene. This causes the film to feel somewhat repetitive at times and takes up a big chunk of the 63-minute runtime. Our two lead characters are very well acted by LaRock and Astrid Allwyn. However, the characters did feel sort of one-dimensional. Lamont Cranston was always just amazingly smug and good at his job. He was also quite the quipper, and we really don't get to see any growth or arc in his character. But he does act as a great guide to the story for the audience, and really is the backbone of the story. On the other hand, we have Phoebe Lane. She was a smart, brave, and confident character that was a great right hand to Lamont. However, when the story wants to force a joke out, she often would be on the receiving end of it, being classified as a standard 30s woman who is an airhead who only cares about cooking and starting a family. Although I can see how the audience in the 1930s probably thought these jokes were some real knee slappers, seeing such a good female character, especially considering the time, being mischaracterized scene by scene for no story-driven reason was kind of a shame. Overall, this film was good. It was a lot easier to watch than the first, as it was more entertaining and I was more engrossed in this journalist detective solving the crime than the original movie. However, how does this hold up as an adaptation with source material? Well, not that well at all. Where the first film was a branded adaptation with a lot of differences, it still had a foot in the actual Shadow brand. This movie has so little to do with the Shadow, it's shocking. To start, this movie drops the Shadow title to go with International Crime, which I thought was strange even before watching the film. However, once I got into the film, I quickly realized that the Shadow persona was not of a mysterious vigilante, but now of a radioed personality. In the original Shadow radio show, it was never revealed revealed who the Shadow was. In fact, Lamont Cranston was just someone that looked like the Shadow that he would occasionally pretend to be and work with. In this version, the Shadow is Lamont Cranston, but he also is not really the Shadow in the way the source material presents. I'm really confused why this movie was technically a Shadow movie at all, or why they got the guy who played a more faithful version of the character in a previous movie to reprise his role. The one thing I could give it credit for, however, as an adaptation, is making it about a radio show with the Shadow, except with the whole twist of the Shadow actually using this show as a platform to solve crimes, rather than just being the medium in which the stories were presented. So if you're looking to watch a good old movie that really impacted the superhero film genre, or comics in general, this is not the film for you. However, if you enjoy a good mystery movie, this film may be worth checking out, especially since it will only set you back about 63 minutes, and you can watch the whole film on YouTube.
Miss Lane, why didn't you stick to the baby and biscuit end of the newspaper business instead of hurling yourself into the jaws of death?